Nearly every national analyst got the San Francisco 49ers wrong this offseason, and 2 preseason games have now exposed exactly how wrong. The story all summer was age and decline. San Francisco fields the oldest offense in the NFL by average age, according to roster data compiled by Ian Hartitz, and the defense finished dead last in the league last season with 20 sacks. That is the indictment, and on paper, it holds up fine. Then the 49ers walked into SoFi Stadium on August 20th and beat the Los Angeles Chargers by a final of 41-17, almost entirely with players nobody has spent the summer arguing about. Here is the detail that makes this more than a box score. 2 days before that game, the Chargers had beaten San Francisco badly in a joint practice. Justin Herbert carved up a secondary playing without Nick Bosa and Michael Williams, and Brock Purdy acknowledged afterward that the offense was not sharp. Then that same roster held the Chargers to 4 first downs through 3 quarters, outgained them 321 yards to 229, and put up 41 points. Jacob Cowing returned a punt 83 yards for a touchdown. Kyle Shanahan called it a big-time play. What I want to lay out for you is the full roster picture underneath that result, because the national conversation has fixated on roughly 10 aging stars, while about 60 other players quietly got better. I am going to walk through what left, what arrived, what the 2026 draft actually delivered, and what still has to break right. But before we jump into that, hit that like and subscribe button for more 49ers and all the NFL content. Can we get 100 likes on this video? Start with the record, because the record lies in both directions. San Francisco finished 12-5 last season and then went into Philadelphia and beat the defending Super Bowl champions 23-19 in the wild card round. Brock Purdy threw for 262 yards in that game and hit Christian McCaffrey for the winning touchdown late in the fourth quarter. On its own, that line reads like a team knocking on the door. A dozen wins, a road playoff victory over the champs, a young quarterback delivering in January. The following week, that same team lost 41-6 at Seattle. The Seahawks went on to win Super Bowl 60, so the 49ers were 1 round from a conference championship game and also 35 points from being competitive in the round they lost. Both of those things are true, and picking whichever one supports your argument is how most of the offseason coverage got written. Let me be fair here. One blowout in one road playoff game does not define a roster. What it did was expose what the underlying numbers had already been screaming. Those numbers were ugly. 20 sacks in 17 games, last in the NFL. 6 interceptions, second fewest in the league, ahead of only the Jets. According to defensive havoc rate data assembled from NFL FastR and Pro Football Reference, San Francisco ranked 31st out of 32 teams in generating negative plays. A defense that cannot sack the quarterback and cannot take the ball away is a defense living entirely on other people's mistakes. That is not a scheme problem or a coaching problem. That is a personnel and availability problem, and the story of how it happened matters more than the number itself. So here is how that season actually unfolded. In Week 3 against Arizona, Nick Bosa tore the anterior cruciate ligament in his right knee, and his season ended. He is a former Defensive Player of the Year and the single most important pass rusher on the roster. 3 weeks later, All-Pro linebacker Fred Warner dislocated and fractured his right ankle against Tampa Bay and was also gone for the year. By the middle of October, San Francisco had lost the best player at 2 different levels of its defense. Then it got worse. Michael Williams, the 11th overall pick in the 2025 draft and the rookie who had stepped directly into Bosa's snaps, tore his own anterior cruciate ligament in a win over the Giants. On offense, Brock Purdy missed 8 games with a combination of turf toe and a sprained AC joint in his left shoulder, and he finished with only 2,167 passing yards, 20 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions across 9 starts. The 49ers were not managing injuries at that point. They were replacing entire position groups on the fly with practice squad players. Christian McCaffrey absorbed the difference almost by himself. He touched the football 413 times last season, the highest total in the NFL, rushing for more than 1,200 yards, catching 102 passes, and scoring 17 total touchdowns at age 30. He was named Best Comeback Athlete at the 2026 ESPYS for it. And then in the wildcard win at Philadelphia on January 11th, George Kittle tore his right Achilles tendon. He had surgery 3 days later with Dr. Neil Alatricha. That is 5 foundational players lost in a single season, which is the actual explanation for 20 sacks. Now, to what left? Because the offseason turnover here was larger than it has been made to sound. Defensive coordinator Robert Saleh departed to become head coach of the Tennessee Titans in January, 1 year into his second stint in Santa Clara. That is not a firing or a falling out. Saleh had kept a shorthanded unit functional enough to finish 13th in scoring defense, and a head coaching job came calling. But it meant San Francisco was installing an entirely new defensive system in a year, when it also needed that system to fix its worst statistical weakness. The receiver room turned over completely. Brandon Ayuk and Jawan Jennings are both gone. Bryce Huff was released in March. Those were not marginal roster spots. Jennings had functioned as the de facto #1 target the previous year, and Huff had been acquired specifically to help a pass rush that never materialized. Strip those names out, and what you're left with before free agency was a passing attack with no established outside receiver and a defensive front with 2 starters coming off knee reconstructions. The most painful loss came in training camp, and it involved a player who is technically still on the roster. Ricky Pearsall, the 2024 first-round pick and the presumed starter opposite the new veteran addition, was placed on season-ending injured reserve 6 days into camp with a posterior cruciate ligament injury requiring surgery. General manager John Lynch said Pearsall faces a recovery of 6 to 12 months and told reporters, "We're gutted." At 25 years old, that is a full lost season for a player San Francisco needed to take a step forward. Which brings us to what arrived, and this is where the roster math starts moving the other way. Raheem Morris was hired as defensive coordinator on February 1st after 2 seasons as head coach in Atlanta and a Super Bowl winning run as the Rams coordinator. He has installed 5-man fronts and 2 hybrid roles he calls the star and the fever backer, positions that can rush, drop into coverage, or play off the ball. Trent Williams described the change to ESPN in 3 words. "Everything's different," he said. Free agency rebuilt the receiver room from nothing. Mike Evans signed a 3-year deal in March. Christian Kirk signed for 1 year worth up to $6 million. Then on July 30th, after the Pearsall diagnosis, San Francisco brought Deebo Samuel back on a 1-year contract worth up to $7 million, 1 year after trading him to Washington. Bleacher Report called that the best free agent value signing of the summer. Linebacker Dre Greenlaw also returned after a single season in Denver, reuniting him alongside Fred Warner. The defensive front got 2 trades, not 1, and that distinction matters later. San Francisco sent a 2026 third-round pick to Dallas for interior lineman Osa Odigizua in March, and had already sent a 2026 sixth-rounder to New England at the previous trade deadline for edge defender Keion White. Add cornerbacks Nate Hobbs and Jack Jones on veteran deals, and you have a defense that added 4 rotational or starting pieces without spending a single first-round pick to do it. Then came the draft, and this is the part the national coverage skipped almost entirely. San Francisco traded down twice out of the first round, picked up extra middle-round capital, and opened the second round at pick 33 with Ole Miss receiver Dejon Stribling. He is 6'2", ran a 4.36 second 40-yard dash at the combine, and was widely graded as a reach. John Lynch did not flinch at the criticism. "That's where we had them," he told reporters about the day 2 picks. NFL.com analyst Chad Reuter graded the full class an A-. At pick 70, the 49ers took Texas Tech edge rusher Romello Height, who recorded 10 sacks and 11.5 tackles for loss in his final college season. At pick 90, they added Indiana running back Kalen Black, a national champion who scored 10 touchdowns last year and profiles as a downhill one-cut runner in this scheme. Those 2 selections address the exact 2 things the 2025 season proved San Francisco could not do, which is rush the passer and run the ball without Christian McCaffrey on the field. The rest of the 8-player class went defensive tackle Grayson Halton at 107, offensive lineman Carver Willis at 127, cornerback Ephesians Prysock at 139, linebacker Jaden Duggar at 154, and offensive lineman Enrique Cruz Jr. at pick 179. Stack that on top of a 2025 class that spent its first 5 picks on defense, including Alfred Collins, Nick Martin, Upton Stout, and CJ West. And San Francisco has added 19 drafted players to this roster in 2 off-seasons. That is the 60 players I mentioned at the top. Let me step back and give you the counterfactual arithmetic because it reframes everything. San Francisco's entire defense produced 20 sacks last season. Myles Garrett produced 23 by himself, setting the single-season NFL record and winning his 2nd Defensive Player of the Year award. In June, Cleveland traded him to the Los Angeles Rams. So the division rival San Francisco opens against just added a player who individually out-sacked the entire 49ers defense by 3. The rest of the neighborhood is no kinder. Seattle won Super Bowl 60. The Rams now pair Myles Garrett with Matthew Stafford, the reigning most valuable player who led the league with 4,707 passing yards and 46 touchdowns. And San Francisco opens the season on September 10th against those Rams in Melbourne, Australia, the first regular season NFL game ever played in that country. George Kittle is still working back from the Achilles tear and has not committed to playing. "I have a chance," he said this week. That is why the trade rumors will not go away. San Francisco carries roughly $71 million in salary cap space per over the cap and has been publicly linked to 2 different moves. ESPN listed the 49ers as a fit for Tampa Bay defensive tackle Vita Vea, who has formally requested a trade and has 11.5 sacks over the past 2 seasons. ESPN separately proposed a package sending a 2027 third-round pick to Atlanta for All-Pro safety Jesse Bates III, whose 2026 cap number would land at only $13 million. Now, the honest part, and I want to be careful here, this was the preseason. Christian McCaffrey did not play. Justin Herbert threw 2 passes. Most of that 41-17 result was backups against backups, and the same 49ers roster lost its opener to Tennessee 19-13 the week before. Preseason production has talked plenty of teams into believing things that fell apart in September. Nothing that happened at SoFi Stadium is evidence of a win total. What it is evidence of is depth, and depth is the specific thing that broke this team last season. Dejon Stribling has 11 catches through 2 preseason games and became the 2nd NFL receiver in a decade to catch 7 passes in the first 20 minutes of a preseason game, according to former front office analyst Ryan Paganetti. Kalen Black, Jordan Watkins, Nick Martin, Sincere McCormick, and Jacob Cowing all produced. When 5 injuries hit this roster in October, those are the names that determine whether the season survives. So the fair read is neither of the ones being sold to you. San Francisco is not a finished contender, and it is not a collapsing veteran roster running out of time. It is a team whose stars are older, and whose supporting cast is dramatically younger and better than it was 12 months ago, waiting to find out whether Nick Bosa, Michael Williams, and George Kittle come back close to what they were. That answer arrives in Melbourne on September 10th. If you want the roster cut-down breakdown before then, the subscribe button is right there.